For 10 long years, I lived a life that felt more like survival than living. After my husband walked out on me and our son, my world shrank to two things: work and motherhood. I buried my emotions, ignored my own heart, and convinced myself that raising my son well was enough reason to wake up each morning. My days were filled with routines, and my nights were spent in silence, staring at the ceiling, trying to remember what happiness even felt like. My son, the only reason for my strength, grew into a fine young man. Throughout his childhood and teenage years, his best friend, Rian, was a regular guest at our home. Polite, well-mannered, and warm-hearted, Rian often felt like the second son I never had. I watched him grow from an energetic boy into a mature and responsible young man. He had a kind smile and a natural sense of respect that set him apart. Even though I was surrounded by people at work or by family on rare occasions, none of them saw through me. No one noticed the loneliness clinging to me like a second skin. I never told anyone about the emptiness. Over the years, it grew heavier, but I stayed silent, thinking that this was how life would be until the end. Being strong had become a habit, but deep down, the absence of affection, of someone caring for me as a woman rather than just a mother or employee, had starved my soul. I still remember sitting by the window some evenings, sipping cold tea, listening to the quiet house, and thinking about the days when laughter and warmth filled these walls. My son was busy carving his future, and I was proud of him. That pride, however, couldn't fill the space his father's absence had created. Rian, unlike others, never treated me like just another adult. Even as a teenager, he was observant and thoughtful, offering small acts of kindness without making me feel pitied. He'd bring groceries without being asked or fix things around the house when my son was too busy. At first, I saw it as simple politeness, the way a good boy would treat a friend's mother. But slowly, his quiet company became a balm for the loneliness I kept locked away. Sometimes, he'd join me for tea if my son wasn't home, talking about his college life, ambitions, and small moments from his day. I never felt judged around him. I felt seen. He had an ease about him, as if my presence mattered, even if no grand conversation took place. I didn't realize it back then, but those small conversations, those simple gestures, were the only real, human connections I had left. Over time, I began to wait for those moments, cherishing the times when he dropped by, not just as my son's friend, but as a thoughtful young man who brought with him a sense of comfort my heart had long forgotten. When my son moved away for work, the house felt even quieter, like the air itself had grown heavier. I told myself it was normal, part of life, part of being a parent. But the silence was deeper than that. It was the sound of an empty life stretching endlessly in front of me. Days passed in a dull loop: work, meals, sleep, and more work. I didn't expect anyone to notice, and I certainly didn't expect anyone to care. But Rian did. Even after my son moved out, Rian kept visiting now and then, always finding reasons to drop by. Sometimes he'd bring vegetables, sometimes just to check if the garden needed watering, or to help me lift something too heavy for one person. I noticed how much he had changed. His face, more mature now, carried the calm strength of someone who had learned to listen more than speak. Whenever he sat down to talk, I didn't feel like someone's mother anymore. I felt human, visible, acknowledged. He never asked intrusive questions, but he always knew when I needed to talk and when I simply needed someone nearby. I found myself speaking more freely to him about my day, about my health, about old memories I usually locked away. I wasn't used to anyone paying such quiet attention to me. With Rian, conversations didn't feel forced or empty. They felt like sharing, as if for the first time in years, my thoughts mattered to someone. As months passed, the connection between us became undeniable, though unspoken. There were moments when I'd see him look at me not with the eyes of a boy, but of a man who genuinely cared for my well-being. He started noticing small things: when I'd forget to eat on stressful days, when I looked more tired than usual, when loneliness showed itself in the way I sat silently at the table even with food in front of me. It was never about grand gestures or dramatic moments. It was the small, unnoticed ways he filled the empty spaces in my life that made the difference. He would remind me to take care of myself, encourage me to pick up little joys like reading or walking, things I'd long forgotten. I started to realize how much of my life had been spent in silence, pretending that I didn't need anyone, and how easily he had broken that illusion just by being kind, steady, and present. What surprised me most was how natural it felt to have him around, even without my son there. No discomfort, no awkwardness, just an understanding that didn't need explanations. It wasn't about age or labels. It was about two lonely souls finding quiet comfort in each other's company, without expecting or demanding anything. For the first time in years, I felt less like a woman abandoned by fate, and more like a person worthy of being cared for, not out of obligation, but out of genuine connection. The next morning felt different, not because the sun shone any brighter or the air smelled any sweeter, but because I knew sooner or later, Marcus and I would have to face the quiet truth neither of us had spoken. I didn't have to wait long. As I stepped out to water the small patch of flowers I'd planted, I heard his voice, soft but steady. There was no awkwardness in his tone, only honesty wrapped in simplicity. He apologized. Not for existing in that moment, but for making me feel seen without my permission. His words weren't rehearsed or dramatic, just real. And I realized, standing there with the sun on my face, that it wasn't the kind of apology meant to erase the moment. It was meant to acknowledge it. I accepted it just as simply, and without even realizing it, the conversation unfolded beyond the surface. We talked, at first about harmless things, the neighborhood, the weather, the quirks of settling into a new home. But somewhere between those casual exchanges, the walls began to fall. Marcus had a way of speaking that felt both calm and sincere, as though each word was chosen carefully, not to impress, but to connect. He told me about the reason he moved here, leaving behind a rushed life in the city, trading chaos for quiet. His voice held a hint of stories untold, and the more he shared, the more I listened. I opened up, too, letting him see beyond the polished version of myself I showed to the world. We talked about starting over, about the strange mixture of freedom and loneliness that came with moving to a new place. Time slipped away unnoticed, and I found myself realizing how easy it was to be around him. The awkwardness of the day before had dissolved, replaced by something unspoken but strong. He wasn't just my neighbor anymore. He was someone I genuinely wanted to know. There was no rush, no forced smiles or shallow compliments. Just two people standing in the sun, understanding each other without the need for anything more than honest words. Before we parted, he asked if I'd like to join him for coffee over the weekend. His voice was casual, but I could tell the invitation meant more than caffeine and conversation. I said yes, not because I felt obligated, but because I wanted to. As I walked back inside, I realized the moment that had once felt like a strange accident had quietly become the start of something real. I wasn't sure what it would lead to, but for the first time in a long while, I felt curious about the future, and for once, curiosity felt like a good thing. Let me know when you're ready for Section 4. ChatGPT said. Our coffee meetup felt natural, as if we had known each other longer than just a few short conversations. What started as simple plans for one afternoon stretched into hours, and neither of us seemed in any rush to end it. There was no pressure to impress, no pretending, just a flow of stories that filled the space between us easily. Every topic, from childhood memories to favorite books, seemed to peel away another layer, revealing a person I hadn't expected but was glad to meet. The days that followed only deepened that connection. Our talks moved beyond casual likes and dislikes and into the kind of conversations that left you thinking long after they ended. He shared the quiet parts of himself, the struggles of fitting into new places, the weight of expectations, and the fear of starting over more times than he could count. I listened, and in return, I offered pieces of myself I usually kept hidden. There was no judgment in his eyes, only a steady presence that made vulnerability feel safe. There was something grounding about being around him, as if the world slowed just enough to let you breathe deeper. I started to realize how rare it was to meet someone who didn't try to fill silences, but instead made them feel comfortable. Our friendship formed quickly, but there was always a quiet tension beneath it, the kind that hinted at something more without needing to name it. That unspoken thread tied each moment together, turning small interactions into something meaningful. I thought back often to the moment at the window, how an accidental glance had created a shift I hadn't expected. What could have been uncomfortable had instead opened the door to something honest. Our lives had brushed against each other before that day, but now they seemed to move alongside each other, slowly but surely intertwining. There was no need for grand declarations or perfect timing, just the understanding that sometimes connection comes when you least expect it, and not always in the way you imagined. One evening, as we walked together under a sky full of stars, the air held the same quiet weight of that first glance, except this time, there was no surprise, only certainty. Our hands found each other, and the simple act of holding on said more than words could. It wasn't just about curiosity anymore. It wasn't about the accidental or the unexpected. It was about choice, about trust, about the comfort of knowing someone had seen you in a vulnerable moment and stayed. Sometimes life offers you second chances dressed as quiet beginnings, and I had learned that the simplest moments are the ones that stay with you the longest. All done. If you want, I can help polish it into a smooth YouTube voiceover-ready script too. Just say the word.